Hi, I'm Lynn Cornell, and welcome to Journey Through the Bible Verse by Verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study through each book of the Bible, verse by verse and chapter by chapter. Keep in mind, I am using the Holman Christian Standard Bible, so if you're reading from a different Bible translation, the read will be different, but the message is the same. We're going to continue in our study through the Gospel of John, and we're in chapter 11. Verse 1 says, Now a man was sick, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Martha was the one who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who was sick, so his sister sent a message to him, Lord, the one you love is sick. Now, there's a couple of things about Lazarus. Lazarus was a personal friend. He wasn't just in general when he says Jesus loved him. But in a sense, he was a personal friend. And we'll see this in the next chapter. But when Jesus came to town, he hung out with Lazarus. He was at Lazarus' house. He was close friends with Lazarus and the two sisters, Martha and Mary. They cooked, they ate, they fellowship. If this was a modern day relationship, Jesus and Lazarus would have been golfing buddies. They would have went on holidays together. This is the kind of relationship. Now, the only other person in Scripture that I can think of that had this designation was the writer John himself. And it says that Jesus had a personal relationship with him. Now, there was another kind of interesting thing about Lazarus, and that is there was a man identified as Simon the leper in the other Gospels. And the similarities in the stories would make us believe that they are one and the same person. Now, the only reason why I bring this up because when you read the other Gospels doesn't mention Simon being raised from the dead. However, you're going to see as we will get into the next chapter, the events of him hanging out. And as John mentions here in verse 2, the incident where she anoints Jesus' body, anoints his feet, wipes her feet with her hair. And so the person that's identified is Simon the leper. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is that Simon is identified as a leper, which is interesting. But none of the writers kind of go into if he is a leper, was he a leper? If he's identified as a leper that Jesus healed him, we don't know. It's just an interesting observation here. Now, verse 4 says, When Jesus heard it, he said, This sickness will not end in death, but is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, listen, again, it's one of these statements, when you hear it, it sounds like Jesus is saying that Lazarus is going to die so that, in turn, God can get glory out of that. And I don't believe that is what Scripture is communicating. In other words, there are plenty of sicknesses and tragedies on their own that will happen, that God doesn't have to get to afflict someone in order to get glory. On the other hand, certainly God uses all things for his glory. And so he's using this situation of Lazarus' sickness to bring glory. Now, verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha, his sister, and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Now, this is not odd, since Jesus just said that this situation is going to bring him glory. Verse 7. Then after that, he said to his disciples, Let's go to Judea again. Rabbi, the disciples told him, Just now the Jews tried to stone you, and are you going there again? Are there 12 hours in the day? Jesus answered. If anyone walks during the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of the world. If anyone walks during the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. he said this, and then he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up. And his disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he will get well. Jesus, however, was speaking about his death. But they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. Now, of course, as we progress in the story, at this particular point, we don't know that he's died. Remember, the news had just arrived at Jesus that he is only and really sick, gravely sick, and there's an urgency about it, which is why they even sent the messengers to him. In other words, we know it's urgent because they sent the messengers. If it wasn't urgent, if it was just a regular common cold, flu, or something like that, they wouldn't have even bothered to send a message to Jesus informing him. But when Jesus says, I am going back to Judea. Now, Bethany is in Judea, around the area of Jerusalem. And if you remember the events of chapter 8 and the events of chapter 10, they tried to stone him. They tried to kill him. So he kind of goes to the northern part of the country where he grew up in Galilee. Now, verse 14, so Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. I'm glad that I wasn't there so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Now, I want you to kind of file this statement right here for when we get down to the grave site of Lazarus. Notice what Jesus is saying here. I am glad that I wasn't there so that you might believe. In other words, so Jesus kind of knows what he's doing. Remember, he says that this sickness won't end in death. Then he turns around and says, Lazarus has died. So what does Jesus mean by that? Well, obviously, how we talk in terms of language, it didn't mean in the sense that the death would be a permanent death. In other words, yes, Lazarus is going to die physically. He is going to expire. Now, Jesus is informing them that he's going to raise them up. He's going to rectify the situation. Now, I want to kind of you file this in your mind that Jesus knows he's going to Bethany to raise his friend Lazarus from the dead. Just want to keep that in mind. Verse 16, then Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us go so that we may die with him. Now, this is totally missed the point right here. Jesus didn't say that we're going to die with him. So where did he get that? We don't know. But he totally missed the point here. Verse 17, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, remember, he hung back 2 days. And remember, journeys were slow. For him to move from Galilee south to Judea, even if he passes through Samaria, which he probably did, it's time consuming. You're talking, I don't know, 40 or 50 mile trek. So in a sense, it's about a 2-day journey, and just, walking in the daylight, traveling in the daylight. Now, verse 18, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles. Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. And as soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Now, interesting reaction. Later, we're going to see that Martha will have a different reaction. Mary is the one who is going to anoint his feet. But it's interesting here, she remains and Martha rushes to the grave site. Verse 21, then Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give it to you. Now, I don't know exactly what she was expecting. Was this a kind of a vain prayer? I know that whatever you ask for God, or maybe one to just hope. What is interesting, notice her statement, if you had been here. In other words, all of her hopes, all of her faith was in a particular circumstance, a condition, if you had been here. Verse 23, your brother will rise again, Jesus told her. Martha said, I know he will rise again at the resurrection at the last day. So that's why I cast doubt on when she said, I know whatever you ask God, he will give it you. In other words, was he really expecting that? At this point, I don't believe she was. Verse 25, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, he will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now, Jesus makes this bold statement. I am the resurrection. And he uses the term I am again. So remember, he's been using this term, I am. Now, remember, the Jews know what he's referring to. He's making a statement of deity, of divine prerogative. I am. This is what God says, I am. No earthly man or angel or created being could ever make that statement. But Jesus is making the statement, I am the resurrection. He said, I am the light. I am the life. So he puts the power, the condition, solely in him in a kind of a right now situation. Not a yesterday, not a tomorrow. I am right now the resurrection. So if you believe in me, he says, you're in a state of life. She still doesn't really know what this is, but notice what her answer is. Verse 27, yes, she told him, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world. Now, this statement, I believe, is a great statement of faith. Because in her mind, she's trying to process the grief of her brother. And I believe on top of the fact of not understanding what Jesus is saying. In other words, Jesus says, I am the life. I'm the truth. Okay, she's like, all right, I got that. I am the resurrection. I got that. But my brother is dead. So he said, well, if you believe in me, I am the resurrection and the life. If you believe in me right now, you will never die. Do you believe that? She says, I believe you're the Son of God. Now, the reason why I say that, I think that's a great statement of faith, is because despite her doubts, despite what a statement of faith, her understanding is, her surrender is, whatever you say, Jesus, I believe. Wherever you lead, I believe. And I believe that is what is the great statement of faith with her. Now, I'm going to stop and I'll pick this up in the next video and we'll finish out the chapter here. So I'll pick this up in verse 28. All right.